Hello, folks. Hello, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, Phil McKenzie.
Hello.
Hello, Phil. How are you on this fine Christmas Eve?
Not too bad. Certainly settling into the sort of Christmas lazy vibe. I'm no longer at work, and neither is the UFC, and so it looks like we've got a nice, gentle cruise into some relaxing handies at the end of the year, and not much else to talk about.
That's what I look forward to all year, is just a nice, relaxing handy.
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't we all, expect that much for ourselves? Speaking of the UFC no longer working, I saw they just applied for 2 athletic commission permits for 2 Apex events in March. So,
yay.
We get to look forward to more of the same, and we should appreciate this little respite that we're in while we have it. And a perfect opportunity to look back on what was I would say, this is the thing with big events, which UFC 296 undeniably was. They have leeway to suck in a way that, say, an Apex card does not. Because when the fights don't live up to expectations, that is still an interesting thing to think about and talk about. An unsatisfying conclusion featuring, all of your favorite characters is still a conclusion that might have some meaning. And so, having established that, I will say that UFC 296 kind of sucked more than I thought it would. But it's still interesting. Is that fair?
Yeah, 100%. Every fight told us something about people that we care about. It's just that the way those fights told us those things was not always like the most thrilling thing to watch.
Yeah, there were a lot of we put it this way. We sort of knew coming in that this card was defined by a lot of in one way or another crossroads matchups. People squeezing the last few drops of hype out of older stars. Fighters who, a theme of our preview episode was really like the process of aging and how it affects a fighter's game or doesn't. So we knew that, but on top of that, many of those big crossroads fights were, I think the term I would use is one note. You kind of saw the first round of a lot of these and you got it.
Yeah.
You kind of got what the fight was gonna be. And not a lot of big swings that you would hope for in these big momentous fights, but as you said, still very informative. Why am I even bitching and complaining? Colby Covington looked like shit. People who were cheering for him when he came in were booing him loudly by the end. Everyone's mad at him. And he is not champion, and he's not getting another title shot. I really should not be unhappy, because that is certainly the minimum requirement I had for this card, is that Colby Covington be humiliated and have all his momentum thwarted. And mission accomplished. So I'm happy about that.
Yeah, that was at least a satisfying cap to all of this, particularly because, beforehand we said that we kind of expected him to look bad, that he has been looking bad.
Yeah.
And that, at some point Leon Edwards would probably take his eye off the ball, and that might make things a little bit dicey and so on and all that stuff. So it was another, good overall read, I think. But also, none of us expected him to look that bad.
Yeah. As far as picks go, I think we kind of nailed it, at least for the main card. We kind of very clearly understood what were, ultimately a lot of really straightforward dynamics. But I was surprised by the amount of credit that you and I got, like on Twitter and in YouTube comments, for accurately calling the fact that Colby Covington actually sucks now. Because I guess just everyone else didn't notice how bad he's been looking. I don't know. I mean, certainly Joe Rogan didn't seem to be aware.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Rogan is an MMA goldfish at this point.
Of course, but he was absolutely.
We may touch on this later, but he was talking about what a legit contender Cody Garbrandt now is.
Oh my God, I forgot about that. Yeah, I mean, I just think a lot of people it surprised me how many people were sort of shocked by the mere fact that Colby Covington started the fight passively, which to me was the bare minimum of what I expected.
Absolutely, 100%.
Like in reality, you and I expected that at some point he would be coaxed into aggression. That was the surprising thing. That
yes.
he basically couldn't get out. And maybe that's a function of Leon Edwards being sort of so tepid as a pressure fighter that Colby didn't feel like it was a fight or flight impulse for him to actually get aggressive and start taking the fight over. But that was the only shock to me, is that he remained stuck in the mud for virtually the entire fight. He looked worse than I expected, and our expectation was that he would look pretty bad. So,
that's the main thing, is that, like, he couldn't shock himself into going for it.
Yeah.
He looked like Tyron Woodley. But the thing is that, obviously, that's how Tyron Woodley has fought his entire career.
Right.
Like, Tyron Woodley's activity dropped off as he got more and more shot. But, like, it was from a very, like, low bar to begin with.
Yeah.
It was the fact that Covington went from being, the
pressuring antithesis
swarmer
of Tyron Woodley.
Yeah. The absolute opposite, to being literally just, skirting around the edge of the cage and, like, looking to counter? Is that what he was doing?
I think. I don't know. I don't know what after 10 minutes, the only thing I could think was, like, I don't know what he expected to happen here.
Yeah.
Is he delusional? Or, I know he's delusional to an extent, but is he that kind of delusional that he thought this was a winnable approach to the fight? Or did he simply decide he didn't want it? Was he merely fighting for a paycheck and he knew, like, he didn't come in here expecting to win? He certainly didn't show any sense of urgency whatsoever at any point in the fight. And I would say the other instructive thing about this, which was also unfortunately not as surprising as I hoped it would have been, was that passivity from Colby Covington gave us a good look at what post-Usman 3 Leon Edwards does, given basically free reign. And
not a whole lot.
What he does is just enough.
Yeah.
So the question of, did the Usman trilogy match, the rubber match, did that mark a wholesale shift in Leon Edwards' approach to MMA? Answer definitively no. It was still an incredibly impressive achievement. It still represented a man going against a lot of deeply ingrained instincts, but he's still Leon Edwards. And he still basically did just enough to stay ahead of Colby Covington while very, very clearly winning almost every round. If not every round. And then he still proved that he could take his eye off the ball and basically get into, like, sparring partner mode.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm also very glad we touched on that.
Yeah.
Like, let's not assume that his peak is his baseline and that he's not going to do Leon Edwards things, because this was an extremely Leon Edwards fight. Yeah, that's the thing, is the unfortunate thing about, like, having a read that works out really well is that you're just like, yeah, that was stuff we said. And, like, it's like he got his leg torn up from skirting around the cage. He got countered on entries because he can't enter anymore.
Because he's starting from too far away.
He starts from too far away and he stumbles in. And Yeah, it was. I mean, it was just the simple fact that he did nothing to actually make the fight competitive, really, at all. The person who made the fight competitive was Leon.
Yeah,
because he would get out of grappling positions and then re-engage them to prove a point.
Yep.
And then he would get reversed. And then, I mean, as you said, like, there's a debate that he didn't even lose the fifth round because Colby did absolutely nothing on top.
He got a takedown and
another,
fuck all with it.
Yeah, another extremely damning takeaway, right? Is that Covington was clearly down. Was clearly down 4 rounds. And, like, that was his last-ditch attempt at salvaging his only chance at a UFC title.
Can I tell you the very complicated feeling that went through me? Part of which was absolute despair, but part of which was a just celebratory, like, schadenfreude, was that somehow Leon Edwards did let Colby Covington back into the fight, despite having spent, 4 rounds prior, like, basically just breaking him down and making him miserable. But Colby Covington finally gets on top of Leon Edwards and starts punching him in the hip.
Yeah.
That was one of the most pathetic displays I have ever seen in a title fight. That was his moment of greatest urgency. I don't know. What do you make of Colby's reaction when the fight was done? He raised his hands. It's like laughable. There's no way he actually thought he won the fight, right? That was front. He must have known.
Yeah, I mean, clearly he's going into some kind of variant of the Tony Ferguson headspace. Where he's just like, what if I can just create my own complete alternate reality? And just say that that's what's happening. Because in this fight, he looked just shook the entire time.
Yeah.
He did not look like he had any plan to win. And yeah, I mean, afterwards, he was like, yeah, I mean, this was easy and I won. Also, I want to get back in there. And they're like, do you want to fight Shavkat Rakhmonov? And he was like, no, I want to fight Stephen Thompson.
Yeah. Who honestly, could maybe beat him if he fights this badly.
Uh-huh. But certainly given a really bad first round.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, one thing
absolutely smoking.
We'll talk about this later, but the one thing I learned, which I was quite pleased to learn in Stephen Thompson's fight, was that it is really just the response to the shot that has deteriorated. His like tie-up clinch wrestling still looked fine, The skills are still there. It's just the speed and the quickness is gone. So, maybe he could literally beat this version of Colby Covington. But
as I said, I would 100% expect him to like beat him up like reasonably badly for 3 minutes.
Yeah, at least, yeah.
Until like a takedown or something happened.
But I'm going to do Colby Covington the credit of assuming that he is in fact self-aware enough to know that he was losing at that point. A credit which is immediately undermined when you consider that what he did with his one chance to maybe make something happen to pull this fight back from the grave was to lay there without posturing up and throw hammer fists at Leon Edwards' leg. Like,
yeah, I mean, I genuinely cannot think of many fighters who have had a more precipitous drop-off, not in terms of their technique, their ability, just in terms of their activity.
Yeah.
I cannot think of someone who went from having the fights that Leon Edwards had, to having the fights that Colby Covington had, having that fight.
Yeah.
And, he doesn't look like his chin is gone. He was still durable enough and fresh enough to hit high amplitude takedowns at the end of the fight. He is slower, but the level of physical decline does not actually seem to be as high as it is for many shot fighters.
Yeah.
But the mentality is obviously gone. Badly, badly gone. And, I mean, at this point, it's that you have to look at, what he's given up and then say, was any of this worth it? We said last time, the problem is with this kind of approach is that it is an all or nothing approach. It was an all or nothing gamble.
Yeah.
Where if he, what can Colby Covington say about his MMA career now? Can he say he always fought the best? No, because he ducked everyone.
Mm-hmm.
He sat out. Can he say that he at least always went out and gave it 100%? No, because this fight he destroyed his relationship with his best friend, Jorge Masvidal.
Mm.
Just set on fire any kind of, fan love that people had for him by just putting on an utter stinker. It's just really hard to think of a performance which is a fight which has destroyed more for a fighter.
Mm-hmm. The fact that he put on this, again, I'm going to do him the credit of thinking he knows this was bad.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that he put that on and like his attempt to like salvage some like heel persona and some kind of heat from this was that he got on the mic and everyone started booing him. They're like, you suck. Like, we hated that. That was bad. And he like he cupped a hand to his ear. Like they love to hate me. But like, literally, Donald Trump is in the audience. This is a UFC card. These people, and you are fighting a British person in the US, in Vegas, where like the only people who buy tickets to these extremely overpriced events are people dumb enough to have no rooting interest other than nationalist ones. Like, they're just going to root for the American. They were all cheering for Colby Covington when he walked in. It was Leon who got the boos. So they weren't responding to his antics. They weren't responding to his persona. They didn't like the fight. People who were cheering for him were just loudly booing him at the end. And it was, I can't find the words to say how pathetic it was that he tried to make that like a shtick thing. Like, oh yeah, oh, you hate me? You hate me? Like, it's not because you're a badass, because you're like a cool maverick who doesn't play by the rules. They thought the fight sucked. They thought it was bad what you did. That's why they're booing you. Oh. Anyway, yes, as you said, I'm very glad. I do think this actually, like, honestly, I know he called out Stephen Thompson, which is a really pathetic move to try to make next. Typical. I'm not even sure he'll do that, because this is so clearly a man who does not like doing this anymore. If he ever did, he has lost the swagger and the tenacity, which made it possible for him to at least momentarily enjoy being an MMA fighter. Now he's, like you said, he's in Tony Ferguson land. Like, he's just in there having a miserable time. I kind of find it hard to see Colby having a run like Tony had. Like Tony is having.
That was the... Yeah, because I was, on Twitter, I was comparing Colby to Koscheck, right?
Great comparison.
Both had their faces broken by the champ, both like annoying heels, and so on and so forth. And both then had some moments after they got their faces broken, but were clearly on the way down. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Koscheck also had like a huge run of terrible fights at the end of his career, where he would get brutally finished and so on. I don't see Colby doing that. Because he's been such a cherry picker, even whilst he was, ostensibly in his prime and, close to, and he'd only lost like 1 or 2 fights or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And but like he just strikes me as a much more anxious, like tense, miserable dude than Koscheck ever did. Like, Koscheck was always No, he was happy just being the jock bully in a high school movie.
Yeah, he's a natural born twerp, that Josh Koscheck. You know, he's just a little punk at his core, and Colby
liked it. He liked being that punk.
Yeah,
like Colby Covington, you get the impression he doesn't like any of this.
No, I think Colby Covington discovered that like acting out was a way of like getting attention as an adult.
Yeah.
Like literally, I'm pretty sure the story is that Colby was basically on the verge of getting released from the UFC until he put on the act. When he first came to the UFC, he was not this personality. You know, maybe that's just because mics weren't getting stuck in his face. He didn't have the opportunity to show it, but I kind of think he invented Colby Covington as a grown-up. You can't say that about Josh Koscheck. And Josh Koscheck, as a reflection of that sincerity, the sincerity of his persona, he never cherry-picked fights throughout his career. He didn't just fight a bunch of old has-beens to get places. Like, Koscheck fought a lot of good fighters. And continued to during that titanic losing streak that ended his career. It continued to he just let himself get fed to like good fighters, future champions.
Yeah, I mean, I think because he wasn't as incredibly, again, like Covington is incredibly anxious about losing. Now that he knows that he can, it's just made it even worse. That he just desperately unhappy at, he ran away from after the first Usman fight.
Yeah.
And
I kind of forgot about that.
I agree. I don't think he's going to take very many fights. And if he does, they will be, again, the absolute most cherry-picked stuff he can feasibly come up with.
Yeah.
I think we're looking at Wonder Boy, potentially something like the winner of Kevin Holland and MVP.
Oh, yeah.
That's someone that Colby Covington would probably try and fight against. He would probably try and take a fight against. And you know what? There is a solid chance that this version of Colby Covington would get humiliatingly smoked by Michael Venom Page.
Now that you mention it, I guess I wouldn't mind seeing that.
It would be a very much the whole let them fight kind of thing where,
yeah,
you could 100% see this version of Colby Covington just absolutely freak out the moment like Michael Venom Page starts doing the robot in his big wide stance. It's like, oh my god, I don't want to lose like this, and then would go on to immediately lose just like that.
Never seen a man just visibly wet his trunks when his opponent starts to pop and lock it in the cage. So yeah, I don't know. Anything more to say about Leon? I mean, Colby, he is truly he is just shot. He is shot, in a profound way that is, as you've said, very accurately, perhaps the most profound decline, just for how antithetical what he's doing now is to the guy he spent his entire career being. Anything more to say about Leon before we wrap up and move on to the rest of this card?
Just that, we were right to say that he ain't going to be changing much from the Liam we saw.
Yeah.
Still a very good fighter. Mm-hmm. Still adding things to his game. But yes, given this kind of dreadfully empty fight, it is one he is happy to accept, and he'll still find ways to put himself in dicey situations. Yeah,
the one thing you can say for Leon, I can't recall if it was you and me or me and Zane who were talking about this, but I think we both pairs of us made the Edwards-Masvidal comparison.
Yeah.
And trying to, see how a good performance from Colby Covington might actually affect Leon. Not even but just a more characteristic performance from Colby. And, we concluded that at the very least, Leon Edwards has a leg up on Jorge Masvidal in that he doesn't lose these close fights he insists on having with everybody. He does have a sense of where he is round by round, and how much he actually needs to do, which I think makes him pretty well suited to possibly being a champion with a decently long reign. He doesn't, he gives away like the momentum. He doesn't squeeze and press his advantages as he should, but it's a much more kind of neutral sort of error that Leon Edwards makes in all of these fights. He doesn't throw it away.
Yeah, I think it was Matty on Twitter who posted the meme like comparing him to Jose Aldo.
Yeah, exactly. That was very funny.
Yeah, the one where it's like the person.
It's the sexual,
the workplace harassment meme where the person.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's Jose Aldo going, I won a tepid 49-46 to amuse myself, and yes, and then Leon saying the same thing and getting the. That's sweet, and hello, human resources response. Yeah, it's very good. That's and Colby ends up sort of being a bit like the Chad Mendes to the greats of his era, in that he is someone without the whose resume never matched up to his skill set, who lost most of his major fights, but. What Chad Mendes had over him was that Chad Mendes was fun to watch, not a giant dickhead, and Chad Mendes didn't cherry pick his fights.
Yeah. More meaningful record, Chad Mendes is the record Colby Covington wishes he had now. You look back at it and you're like, hey, if there was no Jose Aldo, this guy probably would have made it. He was that good. Colby Covington, it is now, as we said last week, it is definitive. He doesn't get to be the guy, the uncrowned king, the guy who was unfortunate to share a division with Kamaru Usman. This puts a stamp on it. He was, in fact, a bully the whole time who beat up old people, and
no one to blame for anyone who can now accurately take that take but himself.
And LOL, say I. LOL. All right, let's take a break there then. When we come back, another pretty straightforward fight between the flyweight champion and his challenger, Brandon Royval. Of course, on this card, we also had Shavkat Rakhmonov taking Stephen Thompson's scalp. We had Paddy Pimblett. Thanks for that, by the way, Phil. I'm going to continue to thank you when we actually get to that. But Paddy Pimblett, Tony Ferguson.
You got it.
That's your doing, and I want to remind everyone of that. That was Phil's idea. Josh Emmett, Bryce Mitchell. All of this, maybe more. I don't know. After this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Okay, Alexandre Pantoja defended his flyweight title at UFC 296. I don't really think I learned anything from this one, to be honest.
I learned one thing, which was funny.
What's that?
Which is the we were talking about it for one. We were like, it's not that likely, but what if Pantoja has many people who win belts? What if he suddenly comes out and he's like more cautious? What will that look like? Ha ha ha!
What?
This was like. He came out like determined to prove that he is the youngest man who has ever fought as a champion. Like, just came out going like twice as hard as he normally does.
I love him.
Yeah.
He's the most brutish champion I can think of.
Uh-huh.
A lot of people are starting to shit on Pantoja now. They're like,
oh, fuck off.
The opinion is like, oh, you might be the first UFC champion who's like not close to the best in his division and so on and so forth. And
What?
Yeah.
Light heavyweight. Light heavyweight?
That's a great point. We just had Jamal Hill as light heavyweight champion, folks. We had, I mean, forgive me for saying it, we had Jan Blachowicz as a reigning light heavyweight champion, folks. Like, there have been other cases. I love Pantoja. Like, I just, he is such a straightforward fighter. You know, like he's the first brawler champion that really comes to mind. Like, he just goes out there and puts it on people and just pits strength against strength and says, okay, hit me. And just smashes into his opponents, even as champion. And yeah, I wasn't particularly worried that he would show up passive and defensive, with a defensive mindset. Still, good to see that he was still the same guy he was. And that guy, by the way, is the guy who was basically gassing at the point that he submitted Brandon Royval last time. Like, this is another thing people were laughing about, that Pantoja gassed. You folks haven't been paying attention. This dude gasses all the time because he fights like a maniac. He's an incredibly inefficient fighter. I mean, his wrestling is super effective for this division, but what that wrestling game is like bending his back into the shape of a capital C and just wrenching his opponent's feet off the ground. Of course he gasses. Flyweight or no. It's just everything is strength and power with him. But as he showed in that fight with, that last fight with, Moreno, as he showed here, Pantoja has an ironclad will. He is mentally one of the toughest fighters I can think of, as well as being very, very physically tough. But he is one of these fighters who he can gas, and it will not change nearly as much about his performance or his results as you expect it to. You know, it's like, 9/10 of exhaustion is psychological. That's how Pantoja fights. And he just doesn't let himself feel the exhaustion the way an anxious man like, say, Colby Covington would. Or Leon Edwards, for that matter. So, yeah, he went out there, he positionally dominated Brandon Royval, just as he did last time. Royval worked 5 times harder in every single position on the ground, somehow didn't gas, so credit to him for outstanding conditioning.
Yes, Royval's conditioning is absolutely insane.
Truly, like, yeah, one of the most impressive physical achievements of this main card, because he was literally...
just that I've never seen. It's like Carlos Condit's chin back in the day.
Yeah, he was squirming and thrashing and straining every second. He had Pantoja just like on his back, and it was Pantoja getting tired.
Yeah. Like, fighting through, because many of the fights who have leveraged like cardio as a weapon, they do it with efficiency. Like, Cain Velasquez at heavyweight used to pin people to the cage with his head, and he didn't go for crazy takedowns, especially as his career went on. He would just drag people back down, rinse and repeat. Mm-hmm. And so he kind of maximized his advantages. But Royval's he's stuck in half guard, just wrenching away at Pantoja, trying to get him off him. Thrashing around in backmount, and then still basically outlasted him.
Yeah, all of this effort with no results, like, it just was not working to get him out of the positions. He did not stop him straining, nor did it seem to really, like, affect his attitude. Like, I guess this is what he expected. That being said, if this is what he expected, and he should have to some extent, because pretty much the same exact dynamic as their last fight, which is why we had such an easy time picking here. If this is what he expected, he really has no excuse for how dreadful his takedown defense continues to be.
Yes.
I mean, that was what decided this. It was not only the inability to scramble out of Pantoja's control positions that we expected, but just really, really easy to get into those grappling positions. I mean, that is, to some extent, it's a stylistic thing. Maybe it's hard to change, but like, other than conditioning, what did Brandon Royval spend this camp working on? I wonder.
Yeah, it's also one of those things where I find myself worrying that, like, there's going to be a lot of, like, Pyrrhic, or there's going to be a lot of, like, Pyrrhic victories in Brandon Royval's future, you know?
Yeah.
I've always detested the idea of, like, people being like, well, you know, if the fight kept going, would this person really have beaten this other one? It's like, well, they've beaten them for most of the fight so far, so yes. Like, maybe Royval just would have gotten submitted at some point like he did last time. It's probably about as likely as it would have been if they just had infinite time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's also like the idea that, you know, he's going to go into these fights and they're going to... On the one hand, I'm happy they have an action fighter that they can put into, like,
sure,
you know, otherwise dreadful Apex cards and so on, and maybe they can actually get flyweight main events out of him, that kind of stuff, and it's all cool. But yeah, on the other hand, I really dislike watching someone who has such a capacity for just losing rounds.
Yeah. It led to this fight having a very kind of women's flyweight feel. Where there was just, the dynamic was established almost immediately. And whether it was Pantoja dashing into him, Royval not having the footwork necessary to, you know, get off the fence or maintain the distance, or it was Royval himself crashing forward, again, you know, suffering for his inability to maintain ideal distance for his strikes. He just kept basically having the same exchange over and over, where he would just walk into a takedown, or would shoot himself and would then lose the scramble to Pantoja. I don't know. Really, really disappointingly one note, I think it's fair to say. It was not a bad fight. I mean, it was fine. It was fun to watch, but it really just, it ceased developing at a certain point. Nothing new happened other than Pantoja continuing to look more tired without really dropping much more of the rounds.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things, like, Royval obviously also has tremendous chin. He got punched loads of times, and he did actually get wobbled a whole bunch. But, like, if he's going to throw all these strikes, he could at least go to the body. He would have the underhooks there to potentially maybe sort of fight a takedown.
That would be great.
If punched into the clinch. And also, it would be some way of actually leveraging the cardio advantage, rather than it just being this assumption that he's going to be... he's just going to be immortally there, and that his opponent will just get tired. In front, ahead of him.
The advantage of cardio should not be that it allows you to lose a fight forever. You know, like, that is not an effective way of using that ability. He just nothing. He didn't try anything new over the entire fight. Another one, like, not as flat as Colby, because at least he was trying something the entire time. But in a similar way, after, you know, 2.5 rounds have gone by, you got to ask, like, what did Brandon think was going to happen here? Because this is sort of the fight we all expected, and it's just continuing. That's really all I have to say about it. I mean, I thought, the story of the fight was Pantoja's insistence on wrestling, his refusal to actually, like, bow to the effects of his gas tank draining. He showed phenomenal guard passing and excellent control in top position, whether it was half guard, mount, side control, back mount. Royval just did not get out of many of those positions despite trying as hard as he possibly could.
And conversely, when Royval did manage to get top position on Pantoja, Pantoja was out immediately and turning it back into his own control.
Yeah. So?
Yeah. I think it's just a shame that, Pantoja Pantoja probably doesn't have long doing this. Because I simply cannot imagine that he does. And that, we're going to have to, as much as I enjoy the fights with Moreno, he's probably just going to end up having to fight Moreno again, because is it Moreno Albazi?
Is that what they're doing?
I think so. And I would very much expect Brandon Moreno to win that. I would like to see Pantoja Kaikara France. I would like to see him build up a resume. I wouldn't even mind seeing him get to fight just some of the young guns if they just jump someone up the ranks for a shot like
just throw Manel Cop in there,
whatever. I mean, he already beat Manel Cop's ass, but
yeah, I forgot about that. Shit. This is the thing. Alexandre Pantoja is just self-evidently a very good fighter. I don't like this narrative developing of him being like to believe that Pantoja is not actually very good, and that his success here and the fact that he's now a successfully defending champion, to think that is nothing more than an indication of the relative weakness of the division. Which, I think, fair enough. The division is not as good as it was before the UFC cut everyone. They're still in the process of building it up, and they didn't bring back a lot of the really great fighters that they lost then. Fair enough. But to think that Pantoja is only an indication of the weakness of the division, Pantoja as champion, that is to pretend that, technique is what makes a fighter good. And that just ain't the whole story. The dude is really strong, and he's really powerful, and he's courageous, and he's super tough and just indefatigable. Like an unbreakable fighter. And he has spent his entire career, this is the thing. He can't do it forever, you say. That's true. He's 33, but he doesn't look any different than he did, really, in 2015, 2017, when he made his UFC debut. He's been doing this the whole time.
He's just even better at grappling now.
Pretty much, yeah. He has been fighting this way the entire time, and the only people who have beat him are really, really good fighters. So, respect to Pantoja. I don't want to see him fight Moreno again. I'll say that.
Yeah, they fought 3 times. He's won all of them.
Yeah. It was a great fight.
Him to just have a run of cool fights that he hasn't had before. I would like to see him fight Kaikara France, and maybe some new guy.
Mm-hmm.
Who?
I don't know. Tatsuro Taira. Just rush him up the rankings. I'm over him.
That name did spring to mind, but that does seem a little cruel.
Oh yeah, it's way too fast. Okay. Well, that's pretty much all I have to say. Again, a very very one-note fight. Pantoja won. Pretty clear. Let's take one more break. When we come back, we're going to squeeze in whatever else we can. I think we have to jump over, as we did last week, we're going to have to jump over Rachmanov Thompson, at least for the moment, because we got to talk about what you did, Phil. So come back after this. We will be rubbing Phil's nose in what remains of Tony Ferguson after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Phil?
Yeah?
Come in here a second. Come in here.
Wanna trust you.
Phil?
Yes?
What's this? On the floor here?
the remains of Tony Ferguson.
That's right. And how did it get there? Answer me, young man.
Due to the efforts of like a really good fighter who's definitely as good as Tony Ferguson.
Phil, you're grounded. All right, you are grounded in perpetuity. There's a bullshit explanation. Well, Phil, you got it. You know, you equivocated last week. You were like, "Oh, this isn't when I wanted it. I actually wanted it." You know, when Tony Ferguson was quote unquote less shot 2 years ago.
True.
This absolutely sucked to watch from both sides. This was like a really piss poor reflection of the main event, where the guy who won did not win it. I'll switch actually. The guy who lost looked terrible.
Yes.
And we knew that. We expected that from Tony Ferguson. But the guy who won, way more so than Leon Edwards against Colby, the guy who won this fight looked so dreadful, given that he had truly a blank canvas to paint on. This was horrible. This was a horrible, horrible thing that you did.
Yeah, maybe.
You know, what do you have to say for yourself? I mean, Jesus Christ, Phil. Paddy Pimblett.
It was a pretty well matched fight. They had to find someone super bad, but with name value for Tony Ferguson to fight.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it just shows like how bad he is. I'm glad that we talked a little bit about how Tony's grappling is truly dreadful now.
Yes, yeah.
Because that really did end up being the turning point of this. As I actually picked Tony, right?
You did?
Yeah.
You were kidding, though, right?
So I was just like, he's just going to get the chance to punch Paddy in the face a whole bunch. And it was true. But also, he's like the worst grappler in the UFC now.
Yeah. I mean, he just has we can reiterate this, but the point we made last week was that he just has, in every respect, his style is that of a young, durable, fast, athletic man. And it has not evolved or changed. And seeing basically a corpse trying to play like 10th planet rubber guard positions against, say what you will about Paddy Pimblett, and we will say it. He's a fine grappler.
Yeah.
That shit just doesn't work. It didn't work that well even in Tony's prime. It was just that he could do it at such a blistering pace that eventually...
Yeah, it was the Brandon Royval thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, eventually maybe something would catch, and if it didn't, it would create a scramble, and then he'd be back on you, and the pace would just never let up. Without those qualities, it was an utterly useless approach to grappling. He had Paddy in his guard most of the time he was on the ground and got absolutely nothing going. I hated it. I really didn't like it.
Yeah, I mean, I would have expected him to lose grappling battles because Paddy is quite a good grappler, and he's shockingly big.
We'll talk about that.
This guy used to be a 145er.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I just wouldn't have expected Pimblett to go for the takedowns as much, or in fact to get them. This is the other thing, is I didn't realize just how bad Tony's takedown defense has gotten, because so much of his time spent on the ground recently has been, either due to very good wrestlers like Beneil Dariush, or it's due to him doing stupid stuff.
Yeah.
This was again also just the first time he went to the ground was him falling over off a kick, and then he was just stuck there forever.
Mm-hmm.
At least one of the times. Yeah. Paddy Pimblett, the undefeated streak continues.
God. Let's talk about Paddy. First of all, you already brought this up, so I will point out the moment the fight began, I was shook by how huge he looked. I think perhaps Tony Ferguson is shrinking in his old age.
Mm-hmm.
But Tony Ferguson is not and has never been a small lightweight. Quite the opposite. I mean, he's a big, rangy guy. And he literally looked smaller, notably smaller than Paddy Pimblett. Now, maybe, given the way Paddy holds his chin, he does gain an extra 4 or 5 inches of height.
Mm-hmm.
But that shocked me. It made me think that perhaps we have undervalued the extent to which what success Paddy has managed to get at this level is a result of him being just an absolute size bully.
No, like Jared Gordon is not big.
No, he's not.
He still pretty much beat Pimblett.
Yeah. But that's what I mean. Like, without the size advantage, would Jared Gordon not have just, like, thrashed him and very definitively won? Like, how much of his ability to survive just getting beaten up at range and then flopping onto his opponent and holding them down is because he's huge. Like, he must have weighed like 180 in the cage. He looked massive. The other thing that immediately made me laugh was that the very first thing that, I can't remember if it was Rogan or Anik or whoever the third guy was for this event, who was mentioning right at the start that in their pre-fight interview with Paddy, he spoke about how hard he had been working on keeping his chin down. Which, by the way, is definitely something you want to say when you are a professional fighter, 28 years of age, about to embark on your 24th professional fight. You really want to be talking about how you've been practicing keeping your chin down. That's a good sign. But literally, as this was being said by the commentators, they got into the first striking exchange, and Phil, I've never seen Paddy Pimblett's chin higher. It's whatever hard work he's been putting in on that front, it's not paying off. He looked exactly the same.
The shoulders are back. The head is tilting upwards like he's about to burst out into song whenever he throws a strike.
His chin is just super high in the air. I mean, you could see it. He was thinking about it. Like, as they start the fight, you get your, like, your little shot. This is Tony Ferguson and Pimblett. And the Pimblett shot, he is standing like, sort of like when Shogun, Hua was in the mode of like thinking he was Mike Tyson. Really like bunching his shoulders up high, like, which by the way, any aspiring, young martial artist out there, the way to get your, chin protected by your shoulders, it's not to raise your shoulders. It's actually to lower your chin. Chin down, chest up. All right. That's the rule. That just sort of brings the chin below the shoulders rather than like doing this exhausting thing of trying to hug your ears with your shoulders by like lifting them up out of the socket. Don't do that. Just put your chin to your chest. But yeah, very first exchange, Paddy Pimblett's chin super high in the air. And it just didn't. Oh, and then he gassed. How did he gas from this fight? It was all his way, Phil.
He was still getting like punched a whole bunch whenever they were on the feet for that obvious reason. And also like he was getting jabbed to the body.
All right. He was, you're right, but most of the fight was him just sitting in Tony's guard. Just shucking off bullshit rubber guard attacks. And then round 3 starts, and he's just like dead on his legs.
Oh, I see. So what you're saying is it's fine for Alexandre Pantoja to gassed and then gut out a win. It's cool when he does it, but when a real British hero like Paddy Pimblett...
I just don't get it. Like, it was the cruelest part of the fight, Phil. Because for a minute, it was like, is Tony Ferguson actually going to come back to win this? Because Paddy looks tired.
As I said, I did pick him. Because I just have no faith in Paddy Pimblett whatsoever at any point.
But then they just, like, they collided and, like, Tony just, like, falls over, like, at a stiff breeze. Mm. There was no way for Paddy to lose this despite his best efforts.
Yep.
Demoralizing.
Yeah.
Just a incredibly dispiriting fight.
And again, I went through all this in Cage Warriors, where I really started to dislike Paddy Pimblett because he was clearly so bad, and yet he was winning, and people still seemed to like him. And yeah, I just came out the other side, and I was like, "This guy's terrible." I just finds me more. I just always find it a little amusing to see how far he can go. And the question is obviously like, who does he fight next? We talked about this on the Depressed Us a little bit.
Yeah,
I think this was shameful enough that they will actually give him a good action fighter next. I mean, partially because that there aren't very many places for him to go at this point.
What are you talking about?
Clay Guida or Jim?
Yeah, what are you talking about? There's a million places for him to go. There's so many lateral moves possible. You know how many lightweight's the deepest division in the sport. You were just about to name some names. They could give him Clay Guida. They could give him Michael Johnson. They could give him old Jim Miller. They could, the options are endless. There's so many ways to continue feeding Paddy Pimblett meaningless wins, without him ever having to improve. Because he's a huge lightweight who can grapple.
All of those guys are actual step-ups from modern Tony Ferguson.
Well,
you would
anything
any one of them over him quite strongly.
Yeah. But that's what I expect next. I mean, as you said a while back, and I agreed. Like, I think Paddy Pimblett, Terrence McKinney would be funny and stupid, and that feels appropriate. Because these are two fighters with unearned. I don't know if I want to say unearned popularity, but it certainly aren't as good as maybe their most devoted fans think they are. I don't know. Does Terrence McKinney have devoted fans?
I don't know. But I just want it for the memes.
Absolutely. It seems the most likely fight possible for Paddy Pimblett to just get dropped in the first 5 seconds and very likely still win it.
Yeah. Or just get dropped and just instantly KO'd.
Yeah, that would be good too.
People can Photoshop the trash can background and then dropping back down into it, and that's all I need. I think that probably the UFC will cash out on Pimblett now.
You think so?
I think that's enough. Yeah, I think they will cash out on him.
Why do you think that?
They will just put him in. What's that?
Why do you think that? I mean, I don't think so.
Because he can't go any further than this.
Yeah, but there's a bunch of old guys to feed him.
Yeah, but he can't. They don't want to keep him doing this. They want to he needs to be fed to someone who will. Needs to be fed to someone who has more of a future than him. He didn't effortlessly smoke the absolute corpse of Tony Ferguson. He's clearly just not very good.
Yeah, but I don't think that
you can't as much as you want. They've tried modeling people before, and it just doesn't work. You can't. I don't think it's part of their philosophy that much anymore. As the Van Zandt and Sage Northcutt thing. I think he'll just get someone like Drew Dober or Matt Favola next.
Boy, Paddy
They're really
Pimblett.
pissed off. They'll give him Jalen Turner.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I would love to see all of these fights. Shit, I mean, I feel like this is what Paddy Pimblett deserves because he's such a great fighter. Ilya Topuria shocks the world and beats Alexander Volkanovski, And then super fight. Reigning featherweight champion moves up to lightweight for a non-title super fight with his nemesis, Paddy Pimblett. Perfect.
Yeah, like the old weight jumping but not actually taking the belt with you thing that Anderson Silva used to do.
Yeah.
Sure, why not?
Yeah.
Also, overkill. He doesn't actually need to fight any championship level fighters. He can
Obviously
lose
not.
perfectly happily to like people much, much worse than that.
Yeah, obviously.
Presumably Drew Dober would utterly smoke him.
Yeah, I think so. I think Matt Frivola would probably smoke him too. Frivola is a mean counterpuncher. He would hit
any of these guys. I think that is what the kind of thing that they will do, because they like people like Dober and Frivola. And yeah, there's a kind of limit to how much you can get out of the Pimblett meme train.
I suppose so. And at this point, probably you get just as big a pop for finally letting somebody crush Paddy Pimblett as you do for protecting him, to be fair.
Exactly. He'll become able to come back as be able to have the comeback thing after that, and then they can give him another old dude.
All right, so it's Drew Dober next, and then it's Clay Guida.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, that actually sounds okay. I see where you're coming from now. That actually makes sense to me. All right, well let's finish up here with and we're going to get to a couple of these bouts, I think, but let's finish up the main show here with the last fight of the main card, or rather the first. Josh Emmett, Bryce Mitchell. Again, another one, sort of a straightforward call. Like, we had now seen Bryce Mitchell against two squat power punchers. What's it look like against the most brutish and souped up version of that style?
The squattest, powerest puncher of all.
It looks like that. Again, not a lot to say. In this case, at least, the super one-sided dynamic was over almost as quickly as it was established, which is that Josh Emmett hits really hard, and he's just going to wait for Bryce Mitchell to commit to something and then hit him really hard. That was it.
Yeah. Much. I'm glad we talked about how difficult it was to change levels on Josh Emmett because he's so low. Bryce Mitchell actually talked about this himself after the fight. He was like, man, he's really low to the ground. He did not sound like he had any plans as we thought he would need to stand Josh Emmett up. It's like I was going to jab and stay away from. I think he said that he had a cautious approach, but he didn't think that was good for him. That is also true, I think.
Mm-hmm. But I don't know how much better an aggressive approach was going to look. If it was just going
I think, if he'd thrown lots of high kicks at Josh Emmett, I think he basically tried to push him backwards like that, and then had tried to force Josh Emmett to blitz at him and then take him down off that. It might have worked better. Who knows? But, yes, this was clearly not the way to go. But Emmett, Mitchell did again his. He did a little video I saw afterwards where he was talking about how grateful he is for everything in his life and how he's fine. I think it did remind me he can be he can come across as quite a
sensitive, intelligent,
an okay
person.
Guy when he's not being completely insane.
Yeah, no, I think there is definitely there was a fork in the road at some point in Bryce Mitchell's life where it was because I think he is a thoughtful person.
Mm.
He's kind of an inquisitive person. And to some extent is very clearly a student of the game. He has this really broad skill set and has proven really effective at and perhaps this is part of his downfall here in the last couple fights of his, that he's very good at it and in fact relies on his ability to sort of figure out the best way of beating his opponent as the fight goes. He's a student, but he is a student of some of the most insane shit you can imagine. Somewhere along the way, I don't know. Maybe it's just that no one ever convinced Bryce Mitchell that he's not as smart as he thinks he is, that there's still so much more to learn. He's just a strange mix of inquisitive and utterly incurious. But yeah, I mean, pretty brutal finish to the fight. He was...
yes, I mean, maybe the knockout of the year?
Quite certainly possibly.
One of the most violent one-punch KOs I can remember in MMA. Like, it's up there with like some of Johnny Hendricks KOs.
Yeah.
Thing that it reminded me of the most.
Yeah.
Campman and Fitch and so on. But in some ways, even more, like, percussive.
Yeah, really, like, disgusting. Like, Emmett just very patiently, with feints and footwork, drove Mitchell back towards the fence. Mitchell was doing a fine job of, like, trying to keep a good position. But if you're, like, reacting positionally for too long, this is what happens. Emmett picked up on a certain pattern. He drove Mitchell back, saw Mitchell circling first to his right, to Emmett's right, and then right when he started to cut back the other way, his back was nearing the fence, and Emmett just chose that moment to cut him off. He just jumped in, squared up, lined up the right hand. Mitchell thought, okay, maybe I'll land my right hand first, and it just didn't. It just didn't land. And he just got thumped on the chin with a simple overhand right. No follow-up, no setup, other than the footwork. And then he was like having a fucking seizure. I mean, it was absolutely brutal.
Yeah. And yeah, much like Cody Garbrandt down the card, one of those fights where they're like, Josh Emmett is back. I was like,
yeah.
Well, no, it's just a very forgiving style matchup for him.
Yeah, it's just the final referendum, I think, on Bryce Mitchell as he currently is. We'll need to either get... I mean, the thing is we've seen him in these three all brutally difficult style matchups. The moment you put Bryce Mitchell, assuming he hasn't like lost something confidence-wise or durability-wise or whatever, the moment you put him in there against... the kind of guys that he was beating really convincingly before, he'll probably look just the same and just as effective, but he's not going to break through, I don't think, just against the most like durable and difficult to take down fighters that populate the top of this division, unless he changes something drastically. All right.
Same is true of Emmett. This is just one of those.
Yeah, of course.
One of those things where, like, style matchups panned out a certain way, and made for a nice big KO for Emmett and a horrible loss for Mitchell, and just I think cements that both of them will be basically circulating around the same kind of level in the division. It's just that if they happen to meet each other, we now know exactly how it goes.
Mm-hmm. And that'll do it for this week's edition of Heavy Hands. You can find Phil and me on Twitter, @EvilGregJackson, @BoxingBush. You can find me, if you care, over on Blue Sky at King Typo. And make sure you check out the Patreon. We did end up recording some extra material this week, talking about the rest of the UFC 296 undercard. You can check that out, as well as last week's, or the week before, or whatever it was, bonus episode, and some fight commentaries that are going up there as well. We will be back next week, post-Christmas, for those of you who celebrate, for the Handies. And I think that one might be a little delayed, as this week's episode was, but that's fine. You got more important shit to be caring about. It's the holidays, folks. Go be with your families. And we look forward to talking to you then to close out the year, as we always do, in style. And until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.